you've got to do your practices. In Sufism, that means the dhikr of the name Allah. And you've got to be doing this at least an hour a day. If you're not doing it an hour a day, you're not going to reach it. And if you really want to do it, you have to do it at 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning. Because as you go into the soul levels of the barzakh, it's strong. And the 1 hour a day done like at 3 o'clock in the afternoon will not give you the same mateen as the 1 hour done at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's much different. So you've got to do your practices, and you have to do them at the times when the tide is coming in. And you get the power, not at the time when the tide is going out and you're fighting it, which is when most people do it. Okay? Secondly, you can't sin. Or you can do minor sins somewhat, but no major. I know you all want that, but you're talking about. But you cannot do the major sins. So no adultery, things like this. You've got to, no stealing, things like that. There can't be major sins. And the minor ones, try to make them minor. Don't do as little of them as you can. And this is the second thing you have to do. So it's understanding what Allah wants, because you see, if you're going to enter into the haqq, or the ahad, you've got to follow what Allah wants, because Allah will not enter you into that realm if you're not following what He wants. I mean, think about it. I mean, how could you get a PhD if you haven't understood, let's say you're in mathematics and you're trying to get a PhD in some kind of advanced math, how would you get there if you didn't know calculus? I mean, you just wouldn't happen. If you know arithmetic, that's great. That's not going to get you into a PhD math program. You've got to know what Allah wants you to know. So you have to follow what Allah wants. This isn't easy, because all of us want what our desires want. And you see, one of the teachings of barzakh is the willingness to give up what personal desire wants and to cross through into what Allah asks of you, even if you don't like it. You see, because this is very high teaching. If you want to reach to the barzakh, or the other side of it, which is to come into the ahad, the consciousness of God's singularity, which is the most powerful experience on the planet, to do that, you have to cross through the desire to follow yourself. You've got to go past that. And that means that you have to slowly purify those things out of yourself. So when you see yourself wanting to do things that Allah doesn't accept, you have to clean those things. Now you might say, well, why should I? Because I like what I like, or I believe what I believe. I understand that, because I've been there myself, but it isn't going to get you to reach. And you have to make a decision. You have two choices, really. It's very simple. If you want to reach to reach the haqq, to reach enlightenment, to reach the world of unity, you've got to give up your personal will. You have to give it up. And if you don't want to reach it, then you can be in a middle state, which is you can follow your personal will and be with Allah sometimes, and that's called spirituality. Or you can be in the lower state, which is just say, well, I don't care, and I'll just be with the world. So there's three basic states, but really there's two. You're either following Allah or you're not. And there's really basically two states. Okay? And this is why I say that the state of giving up personal will to follow divine will is the whole crux of reaching haqiqah, of reaching divine truth. It is the whole thing. Can you purify out your personal desire to allow yourself to accept God's will? If you do that, you will reach enlightenment, you will reach unity, you will reach God consciousness. If you don't do it, your station will be dependent on how much of your personal will exists within your own consciousness. Okay. So remember now, we talked about three places. We talked about the ahad, we talked about this whole thing, which is the barzakh, and we talked about this part over here, which is your worldly experience down here. Where do you choose to live? If you want to live in the world, That's great. You can live in the world. You can go to church on Sunday, go to mosque on Friday, go to the temple on Saturday, and have one day a week, one of 7, where you're having maybe 1 hour to think about God. Okay, and that's what most of civilization does. It's basically an hour, 2 hours a week, and that's it. You're not going to have a rival. You want to reach this level here. This means that your whole life has to be directed towards God. Your entire life has to be directed towards God. Now, by the way, for the new people, this is not meditation. If you meditate like you do Vipassana, or you do Zazen, or you do some of the meditations today, what you're trying to do is still the mind, so you enter the silence where some of the light of divinity might appear to you. But if you're in the Sufi way, we call it the direct path, al-mustaqim, meaning that you're not meditating on the emptiness, you go the exact opposite. You meditate on what happens after the emptiness, which is the presence of God. And you're focusing your whole life on the presence of God and directing everything towards that. That's why we call it the straight path, because you're straight for God. Even the presence of meditation and emptiness is still a diversion from being with God. It's a way to get there. I'm not saying I'm not against it, I like meditation, but it isn't directly with God. It's before that. So we would say it's a diversion. Okay? So to cross the Barzakh, you've got to put all of your attention here. You have to be willing to look in yourself and find out, what is in the way of this. And you remember last night I talked about the pull. You have to make this your pull. The pull means that this walking into the presence of God itself is the center of your life. It is what is important to you, nothing else. If you don't have this pull as the center of your life, you will not arrive. I mean that, and I've been teaching Sufism 20 years. Without this pull, you will not arrive. You will not reach the Barzakh, and you will not reach what's on the other side of the Barzakh, which is the presence of God consciousness. You won't reach it till you stop. You have to have that pull, which is your intention. I don't know, Habib, if he's here today or not, but he asked that question last night. It's your intention. Okay, so think about it. Everybody close your eyes for a moment. And really, again, this is what I say, the pull, this is like the key to the whole thing, is this pull. Is what is really your intention with life? Is your intention to make money and have some spirituality? Is your intention to have a family and have some spirituality? Or is your number one intention to know God and to come into the presence of God and reach that, and everything you do, your family, your work, your money, your life, is going to revolve around that process? What is your pull? Take a look. How committed are you really? Take a look at your commitment. Okay, 1 to 10. With 10 being, you're fully committed. 1 being, you're committed, 1 day a week for an hour. Where's your commitment? Take a good look at that. How committed are you? Okay, see if you can deepen your commitment a little bit right now, because you're gonna, without the commitment, we say without your himma to know God, your traveling the path will be slow. It's gonna take you 30 or 40 years, maybe, if you're lucky. But if your himma is strong, we've seen people cross in one moment. God can literally pick you up in 1 minute and put you in another reality. So, it all depends on how badly you want it. How badly do you want it? Okay, so I'm curious, how many people would say your hema for knowing God is a 10? Let me see your hands. Okay, 3 of you, okay. 4, okay. How many would say it's 7 and above? Okay, how about 5 and above? Okay, how about 1? You don't want to raise your hands, I know. So, anyways, think about this as you go forward. Kind of get yourself clear, really, what you want. You know, you have to really know it. Maybe I can whet your appetite a little bit. Why would you want God consciousness? Well, here's why. Number 1, it's a state of continual ecstasy. If you reach God consciousness, you will live in a state of ecstasy. Okay, so think about that and think about how you're living now and how much of the time you're feeling ecstatic and amazed and blissful. And think about what it would be like to live in that state almost all the time and still be able to function. That's what God consciousness is about, yes?
I have a question. So, sitting in this room, I'm at a 10. But when I leave this room, I'm not always at a 10.
Let's speak up just a little bit.
Sitting in this room,
yes.
I'm at a 10. Being
Yes.
surrounded by Sufi. Also, when you asked the question, I felt like my hema was 10, but my actions are 7, maybe 8. You know, when I actually leave.
Right.
So,
Yep, you've got to kind of line that up. This is where it takes strength and you kind of have to get smart. Like if you know that you're somebody who doesn't like to get up in the night, then how do you make it so you do?
literally last night, I heard a knock on the door at 2 a.m. I got up, nobody was there. But I made myself go back to sleep, but now
That's exactly it. There you caught the whole path. Like somebody knocked on your door, woke you up, there was nobody there, but I went back to sleep. That's the path. That's what happens. Exactly that.
And I should know that.
Right, exactly. So, next time, now you've learned your lesson.
Yeah.
Next time somebody knocks, you're going to get up and wash your face. You're going to maybe take a cup of coffee if you want and get up and do your practices. And work on it, yes.
How do you have the hema to be with God and not to also be grounded in the world?
Well, my personal experience is the more I am with God, the more my worldly walk becomes better. So in other words, for example, as a physician, when I wasn't with God, I was doing what physicians do. You learn the whole thing and you practice it. But once I started coming with God, somebody would walk in my office and I knew what I needed to do. Okay, they came in, they were tired, maybe I want to check to see if they have diabetes, or I want to check for Lyme's or something like that. But behind it, I was with God, and all of a sudden it would be like a flash of light, and I knew they had Lyme's. I didn't need any lab tests. I knew they had Lyme's, I knew they were struggling with it, and I knew what to do with it. And it came to me all through Tajali, it came through inspiration. And of course I checked it, and it always came out to be right. Always. So when you're with God, it's not that your worldly walk is less, your worldly walk is better. Your worldly walk is better. Allah will show you how to do what you do in half the time. You'll be on your way to come to this class, and you're driving, and if you were with Allah, all of a sudden you'd have this amazing feeling like, I need to turn down this highway and get off the Mopac. And then all of a sudden you do it, only to find out, yes, well, there's a major accident on the Mopac. Allah would show it to you, and you'd say you'd be done half the time because you followed your intuition. I was driving Santa Rosa one day, and I was with Allah, I had this strongest feeling I needed to go into this place where they were selling these manufactured homes. All right, so I turned left, I just shot in there, I don't know why, parked the car. I have to go into that house, right? All right, maybe Allah wants me to buy a manufactured home. I walk in the house, sure enough, 2 of our beloveds are there about to buy this house and couldn't decide. And I prayed to Allah to ask for some guidance to decide whether to buy the house. You see, that's what I'm saying. It's like, what are you following inside yourself? You're listening. Allah Allah will guide you in that way. I know people who have been on the battlefield and they've listened to Allah and they followed what Allah gave them and it saved their life. So there's many examples of living with God that's very different than, you know, what people think. I'll tell you another great story. One of my really favorite stories was a man who came to me years ago who was a sergeant for the U.S. military, and he was in Desert Storm. Was it Desert Storm? Which is the one where they're going into Kuwait to do the... That was Desert Storm, right? Yeah. And he was a sergeant, he was a platoon leader. Platoon in the U.S. military means you've got 100 men under you. And so his platoon was chosen to be the point of the spear, meaning that when they do an initiative, the point is the platoon that leads off, and essentially all people are killed. So if you've been chosen, there are thousands of platoons, it pretty much means it's a death sentence. So he was 35 or 36, he had 4 kids, a wife, 100 men under him, and he was chosen to be the point of the spear of his platoon. And he was just so, you know, shocked by it. And he knew he was going to die, he knew all his men were going to die. And he was going through this terrible feeling of, how do I deal with this? I mean, the main issue he said was that he was concerned about his men. It was like he loved his men and he didn't want them to die. So he began praying. He began praying and asking, how can I save my men? How can I save my men? And went on for like 3-4 days. And he didn't get any answers. He kept praying and crying and praying and crying. And finally the day came when they were going to lead off. And they were facing, I don't know how many, he said probably like 3,000 Kuwaitis. And they were surrounding the oil fields. And he was leading off from the U.S. side, and they had a tank. The tank kind of rolled out ahead of time, and a mortar hit the tank and it blew up, and the tank stopped. The people were not killed inside of it, but it stopped, it didn't work anymore. And then the 100 men began traveling out, and as they started to walk out, the Kuwaitis began saying, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, because they were getting ready to engage. And then all of a sudden he said, and you'll hear this a lot in Sufism, that there was this light began to appear out of nowhere. He said it was like a light. And as it began to appear, he said soon it became brighter and brighter and brighter, and it was pure white. And it got so bright, he said, that he couldn't see anything but pure white light. And all he could hear was Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, only pure white light everywhere. And as the light got so bright, it got to this crescendo of Allahu Akbar, and all the Kuwaitis then took their rifles, picked it up over their head, and then put their rifles down on the ground and surrendered. And not one person was killed. Not one person was killed. And it was that experience of that white light with the Allahu Akbar, which is what brought him to me, because he was seeking to try to understand what that experience was and why he survived. Okay, so we're learning how to have that experience. That white light is the ahad. That white light that came in, that was this. That's what it was. And why did it really come in my opinion? Because he called it. He was praying so hard for it, because out of his love and his sincerity and his care not to have anybody die, he was the one that brought it through. He brought it in. And he was really, it was his prayer, his intention that called forth for that light. Well, when working with cancer, which I've worked with many, many times, we have many stories of people who bow to God, and when they bow deep enough with great intention, this same light appears, and it washes through their cancer, and their cancer disappears instantaneously. So we have seen this in stage 4 cancers as well, stage 3 cancers, where Allah's light can show up and it washes through your illness and it's finished. And there's no understanding of why. You go to the doctors, they don't understand it. One of my patients, but a friend, she developed a septal defect, big septal defect in her heart, big hole between the right ventricle, left ventricle of the heart. She was about 53. They were going to put her in for open heart surgery to close the hole, and the results, they said, were not good. They did not expect that it was going to work really well because of a very big hole, and they were concerned that she might die on the table as well. The husband, who was a sheikh and imam for the area up in Santa Rosa, he asked that everybody prayed, and all the people in the university prayed as well. And there was this very strong prayer vigil that went out for her. Well, she gets into surgery a few weeks later. The anesthesiologist was actually a Muslim man. And as he was about to put her under, he said that he had this tajalli, that something had changed and that they needed to check her heart. He said, I don't know where it came. He said, it came from Allah. I had a tajalli in my heart, in my being, from Allah, that she needed to be checked. They brought her back before doing the open heart surgery for MRI, and they rechecked the heart. And guess what? Over the period of 3 or 4 weeks, magically, the septal defect grew back, and there was no need for open heart surgery. It closed on its own. They'd never seen anything like that. There was no precedent for really that to have ever happened.